Hello there, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Today I've got Paul Leach, who's our Pipeline Solutions Manager, and he's going to kind of give us a talk through around how winter can affect your water infrastructure. So we're going to dive straight into questions today. So Paul, first question. So I was looking on the Met Office the other day, and basically they were saying that we had a milder winter in 2019 to 2020 than we did the year before. And I'm just wondering whether or not you sort of in your team saw an increase or a decrease in the number of sort of weather-related incidents on water infrastructure.
Yeah, so you're right, it was a milder winter. And we didn't really see a decrease in the works that we do on commercial properties, because you have a lot of older pipe work on larger sites, legacy pipe work that's not being looked after. So even the milder winter did affect sort of my area.
Yeah.
So there was bursts and obviously issues around that, and but for sort of for newer pipe work, it was, I think the customers were let off the hook quite a lot last year. Lucky, shall we say, because of that mild winter. But then even in a mild winter, you've got frozen ground. So when that frost dissipates and you come into the milder weather, then there is still bursts that occur from that, even if it is a mild winter. So it was a little bit better, but still you're getting zeros and minus
temperatures and things.
Yeah, so it does still affect, but just not in the way that you'd expect bursts left, right, and centre. It wasn't that bad, but we still had a lot of work to do.
Okay, so I suppose one of the questions that we'll probably do get asked quite a bit is actually like, and it almost seems like a silly question to ask, but it's what are the mechanics for sort of like cold weather, and how does it actually create those bursts? Because my impression would be, as a layperson, this would be that water freezes and expands. Is that what creates the cracks, or is it the thawing afterwards? If you could maybe explain a little bit about that, just so people understand how it actually happens.
Yeah, it's actually a bit of both, really, Andy. When you get like a really heavy winter, obviously that in itself can move the ground. It can get to pipes and start cracks and start bursts and move the pipe work. And that's normally what you see. You normally see on severe winters, you'll normally see once you dig it out that the ground has actually moved and the pipe may be in two separate positions from where it should have been. So it's burst because of frozen ground movement. But that's nothing compared to what happens when the freezing ground dissipates, because what you've got is a lot of pipes will be moved by the frost or the freezing weather. A lot of pipes will move into a position that's right on the edge of their joint, and they've been moved. So over a few months in winter, what happens is the pipe gets used to being in that position on joints. As soon as that weather starts to dissipate and the ground moves again, the pressure inside the pipe, the water itself, holds it in that position. So the ground's moving, but the pipe isn't moving back with it. So what happens is that pipe then will move when it's got nowhere else to go, because of the ground movement pushing on it, and then that's when a lot of bursts occur, especially on obviously cast iron pipe works and all metallic pipe works. Really, that's the big issue when you've got freezing weather, is coming out of it.
So I suppose what about if you've because obviously we know that a lot of the time there's kind of small leaks on sort of pipe work, particularly if it's sort of older, like you say. Does that make it sort of more susceptible for something worse happening, I guess? So it's not a great way of putting it, but if there's water coming out of there, can that freeze, and does that then cause bigger issues, or is it mainly around the joints that this happens?
No, it's not just joints. It can be weak spots on any part of the main, really. You can get longitudinal cracks, which are probably the worst to get, because then you've got to replace a full section. You can't just put a clamp around it. Clamps are great for circumferential cracks, but unfortunately on longitudinal cracks you can't just put a clamp on and it'll hold. Clamps it'll last for 50, 60 years. But you know, it's then what you're looking at, that you've got to do quite a lot of work to resolve that. But as you're saying about water coming out of pipes and causing other issues, yeah, it can. And obviously, if a leak reaches the surface, then you've got an health and safety issue there, because that water's going to freeze in some way. But it's very rare that pipe bursts do see above ground leakage. It's about 5% of leaks or something like that. But if you're talking about sort of internal smaller pipes, if there's a leak on them, then it'll normally be a burst, and that's it. Because if there's a small leak on it, it creates movement in the pipe. It creates water movement, so it shouldn't freeze. So then you don't get that big burst. You just get a smaller leak. But when a pipe hasn't got a leak and it freezes, it'll just pop.
Pop.
It
Right, cool.
Yeah.
I was going to say, so like one of the this was actually a question of a friend of mine was asking the other day. They've just bought a new build house, and basically they were asking around, because obviously I work for the water company, they think I know everything. They were asking around, well, are we sort of better protected because it's kind of like a newer build, it's plastic pipes as opposed to these old ones? And I'm just wondering whether or not is there a sort of are newer builds less susceptible to this, I guess, or less susceptible to winter weather damage?
They usually are. You're talking sort of 1960s, you've got copper. Before that, you've got lead. Sort of 90s, you start getting the plastic, I think, if my memory serves. But what plastic does is it's an insulator in itself. So as long as you've got a house that's built to spec, and it's got no gaps in the roof or anything like that, or gaps in the cavities where freezing air can get in, you should be fine. But what I would suggest is that anyone who has pipes in the home is just lag them, because you never know when a burst can occur, and that it's always best just to put a bit of lagging on. You can get it from any DIY store. It doesn't have to be a water company that you get it off. You can get it from DIY stores. It's pretty cheap. Yeah,
brilliant. So I suppose so we'll talk a little bit around sort of like the potential for a burst. It's kind of like, so I guess if you do suffer a burst, particularly if it's a bad one, sort of how do you shut that water off, I guess, is the first point of call to make sure that there isn't any further damage?
Well, absolutely. That's the first thing you should be thinking about, really. On private sites and obviously households, you get a burst in your house, it can cause massive amounts of damage and take weeks and weeks to dry out and all the rest of it. So it's absolutely imperative you know where your stopcock is to turn your water off. Most people have one under the sink, but if you get a burst before that joint, it's going to be no use to you. So you've got to find out where your outside stop tap is. And if you haven't got a key for it, if it needs a key, you might need a really small key, then make sure you get one from somewhere, because you can get them from, if you're asking like the likes of B&Q and places like that, sometimes they'll stock them. If they haven't got them, then they can normally order you in or point you in the right direction. But it's absolutely imperative, and for business, the damage that can do and the cost a burst can do without knowing where your shut-off valve is huge. As you know yourself, and you've seen jobs that I've looked after, and a big mains burst on a private site can just wash half your site away. And the amount of work that goes into putting that right is absolutely massive. So
I suppose it's kind of double-edged. Oh, sorry, I was going to say it's kind of double-edged as well, because if you lose water to your site, it's not just the fact that the water can do damage to your site, it's the fact that that site might have to stop producing or doing whatever it does, and that can be even sometimes more costly.
As you know, we look after some really big companies in the northeast and Essex and Suffolk, and we had an emergency yesterday morning where one of the companies that we look after actually had an 18-inch mains burst, and that was critical to their production. They make toilet rolls for all the big players, So having no water for them was equivalent to something like, and this is just one water main, they have quite a few, was equivalent to something like £10,000 loss in profit an hour. So you can imagine that they wanted to get that sorted pretty quickly, and
absolutely.
I wouldn't say they're lucky, but they've done the right thing in getting us engaged in that site, and we do a lot of work on that site. And we bring things up to spec for them and make sure things are running right. There's a lot of work still to do because it's an old site, but they had us to fall back on. So yeah. what we did is we know where their meter is, we know where their shut-off points is, so we could remedy the issue pretty quickly, and then use our tactical stores in the northeast to get the clamps, because we have them in stock now. No other contractor can do that because these clamps are huge and that cost a lot of money. So they needed 2 clamps. We got that sorted for them, and we also knew where to turn the water off and what to do with it and charge it back up, etc. But if anybody does run a site and they don't know where the shut-off points are, I suggest that they really do start looking at that like right now.
Absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things. I know we did one of these webinars. Seems odd to say it now. We did it in preparation for potential local lockdowns. And I think it was at the time when sort of it might be Liverpool or Manchester was kind of going into the first, what was the first local lockdown. Oh, actually, sorry, it was Leicester, I think, wasn't it, that went into the first local lockdown. We produced a little plan, and it's just got some key points on there. It's not exhaustive, it won't cover everything, but what it will do is give you a good indication of some of the things that you really should have to hand. Not just during a lockdown incident, but just in general. You can download it today from this webinar in the handouts section on the right hand side of your screen. But it's also on our resource section of the website. I think we'll call it the lockdown plan, a water plan or something like that. But what I'll do is at the end of this, I'll put a screen up at the end with loads of links, because we're going to refer to a few other things as well throughout this. But it's on there, it's free, download it, use it. It's in Excel as well. I've left it open, so if you want to edit it to your site, please do so. It's about you having a plan and having action. And the other thing is, make sure that, and this is something that both Paul and I sort of talk about quite a bit, is there's not really much point in you writing a plan for your site and only you knowing where it is. So do make sure that, you know, everybody knows where it is. It's centrally located, so if anybody for any reason needs to access it when you're not there, they can go and see where it is. And photos help. So there you go, little tip.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I mean, it has. I mean, I know we've had quite a lot of engagement from our customers around that plan. Some sort of big housing associations have specifically asked for it from us, and I think they're going to use it on their properties, which, if you can imagine, they've got quite a volume of stock as well. So if they've got one for each one, then, you know, you can have that stored on site, you know, poly pocket on a board, so everybody knows where it is and everybody can get access to it. So it's a really good idea to have it. So I suppose, you know, we're talking about bursts, and I suppose we're talking about the more severe end of it. You know, if you have a burst that shuts off production, you're going to know about it pretty quickly, because something's going to stop, and, you know, alarm bells are going to go off and people are going to start saying, why isn't this working? And you're going to probably investigate it. I suppose when you get into those leaks that are more often than not caused by this kind of temperature differential, is how would you know that you've perhaps sprung a leak, but it's not necessarily stopping production? How would you even find that out?
Yeah, so you'd find that out by, well, what we offer is something called automated meter reading, AMR, because, you know, most leaks that don't burst and stop production or show themselves, they'll just rattle on and cost a fortune. So what we offer is something called AMR, and what that does is that gives the customer 24 hours of data continuously, 365 days a year. And what you can do with that, you can set parameters within the system. It's really easy to use. We have quite a few customers using it, big sites, so they can keep an eye on the system. And what it does is it can set alarms for it. So anything that runs over what you're expecting to use, will set an alarm off for you to say, all right, okay, we may have a problem here. Let's do something about it. Let's get somebody in and look at the site to see what's going on. So yeah, I mean, what we'd say is, you know, even if you don't have AMR, is keep an eye on your meter reads. Your meter reads are imperative. I mean, I know that, you know, water retailers only want the meter reads every 6 months maybe, or once a year, depends what your site is. But it's imperative that you keep an eye on those meter reads. you know, weekly if possible, because then you compare what's being used, what's going through your meter, and it's a much better way of managing what's going through your meter than just waiting for the water company to come and read it once a year or once every 6 months, because then you're going to get a huge bill for a leak you didn't know you had. You know?
Yeah, I was going to say, I suppose that's probably something that you could apply to your own house as well. You know, you know, smart metering for water isn't where it is for gas and electricity at the minute. It's just not there. And although EMR is probably far too well, it's not an expensive product from a commercial point of view, but from a domestic house point of view, it probably is. And the meters probably aren't set up to really take it. But actually, yeah, if you take, you know, if you think. I think if it's domestic usage, it's a 12-monthly target. I think, isn't it? That's got to be read every 12 months, or somewhere around that. It might even be 18 months. I'm not 100% sure. Don't quote us on that. But actually, if you just go out and even if you just checked it once a quarter, you know, if it's in your house, then you know, check it when you do your gas and electricity, and just even write it down, because you'll be able to see that if it all of a sudden spikes, if you think, what's going on here? You know, we might see a little bit of an increase with possibly. Not everybody, but there are a lot of people working from home at the minute, so their domestic water bills are probably going to go up. But if you're taking an eye on that, then you're going to know whether or not you've got a problem. And if you do, again, it's kind of you don't want a 12-month surprise if it happened in January, just after the meter read, and then you get it again 12 months down the line, and you've been wasting a lot of water.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, people see it come out the tap. You know, people see water come out the tap, and it's always there. And that's thanks to the brilliant work our colleagues do in the business.
Yes, absolutely.
And because there's a lot goes into getting that water to the tap that people don't realise. But people see it coming out the tap. They don't think about it. It's not a big expense as gas and water. Gas and electricity. So people don't really think about it. But if you've got a leak and you don't know about it, and it's running 24 hours a day, that will soon give you the sharp shock on your bill, you know, so it's best to keep an eye on it.
Yeah, and I suppose as well for like probably particularly commercial customers, I would say, because of the size of the mains that they have on their sites and the volumes of water that some of them are using, it's kind of if you don't know about that leak, it's not just the fact that you're gonna lose, well, you're losing a precious resource, but you're also paying for that. It's the fact that if you've got a big leak that you don't know about, that it can start moving ground away, washing mud away, and then you've got like kind of issues around sort of the structure of the ground around it, and if that's close to a building, then you've got even bigger issues, I guess.
Absolutely. I mean, I've come across jobs where there's been leaks going for years, and then they have finally burst. But you know, even like what you'd class as a smaller leak on a large main can start washing ground away. If it's close to buildings, it can start washing foundations away, and then you've got real problems, you know, because I've been on a site before, I think it was on the railways, and one of the control boxes for like a main line started to be undermined by a 12-inch main that was running next to it, and they had to evacuate the building. And you know, it's just not somewhere where you want to be. No. And you don't want to be in that situation. So it's always best to have at least a check on your meter weekly, or AMR, which will tell you almost immediately when a leak springs, you know.
Yeah. Brilliant. Just to update people as well who are watching today, we've also got a webinar next week, same time, Thursday at 10 o'clock in the morning, and that's actually specifically on AMR. So if you are interested in that, then do get registered up for that talk next week. And if you're watching this on playback, it'll be on the list of videos that you can watch back if you so choose to do so. So I suppose. Where we get to now is kind of like, so what can you actually do to kind of protect your infrastructure, your pipes against winter weather? What is it that you would do around that? And you mentioned lagging before, didn't you? So I suppose that's fairly important.
Yeah. I mean, for internal stuff, lagging's brilliant. You know, people don't realise how effective it is, but it is quite effective, because you know you should, a lot of businesses shut down for a couple of weeks over the winter period, Christmas and whatnot, and all you need is a window open, or you know, something wrong with your roof or something like that, and that cold air is going to start zapping pipes 24 hours a day, wind chill, you know, and if you've not got any lagging inside your building, then you could be in for a burst that you probably wouldn't know about till you got back, and then what have you got in that building? Have you got your whole computer systems in that building? You know, it's difficult to put into context what can happen, because you know, water is the great destroyer, isn't it? Really, the unknown destroyer, and people don't realise that. You know, the water pipes are there; they don't pay any attention to them whatsoever. So yeah, internally, you definitely look at lagging. Definitely, you know, externally, on larger sites, there's usually some run through them through the mains. There's usually something going through the mains. But in the case of a shutdown and that site doesn't have any leaks, so the water's still, then what you've got to think about is maybe putting a small flushing program in place in severe winter weather, just so that you can bring some water through the mains. You can, you know, take it out your fire hydrants, things like that. Just get the water moving. If it gets to the point where it's, you know, you think to yourself, this is a really cold winter now, we've got to do something about moving this water around our network, or there's a possibility it's going to burst, freeze up and burst. So yeah, you know, all things like that should be considered. If I had my own site, there'd be something in place to sort of try and combat that, where, you know, it's small flushing every day, just to make that water move around the system, because flowing water will never freeze in a pipe.
Yeah. Excellent. And I suppose, I keep saying I suppose a lot today. I'll have to stop doing that. So when looking at kind of, we were talking before earlier around sort of, you know, you need to know where your stop tap is, externally and internally. If there's a customer out there, commercial customer out there, who springs a leak and doesn't have any records, because we know some sites are, you know, something could be 100 years old. You know, it was kind of, you know, it was drawn on a bit of paper with pencil, and that's been lost long time ago for where the utilities are. Is there anything the water company can do to kind of help, I guess? Is it like a matter of, can you contact the water company to help switch that water off if you don't know where they are and you're struggling to find them? What would be the process around that?
Yeah, when you're a large site, there's probably historical works gone on these sites, you know, and the water company will have been the people who looked after these sites back in the day, before retail came in and whatnot. So there's a lot of knowledge in your local water company. And what will happen is, if you've got an emergency, then most water companies will come and help you find where that shut-off point is, if you don't know, because it's in their interests too, because they're losing massive amounts of water from their network. And, you know, the water companies are under targets to reduce leakage, so they wouldn't turn you down and say, no, it's your problem. They'd actually come out and help you, and they might have some idea of where the point of entry is to your site, which will normally be where the meter is and where the control valve is. So that, you know, that shouldn't be something you shy away from, because you pay your bill to a retailer. The water company will, you know, 9.5 out of 10 times always come out and help you, unless they're too busy with other bursts, you know, because obviously we're a company that runs on productivity, you know, and everything's as it should be. There's no spare people in the business, so unless there's a major incident, you should be okay.
Yeah, I suppose that is a good point to make out, because I know with the deregulation of water, where there's now this kind of the water companies kind of deemed as a wholesaler, and then there's a retail element, and a lot of the time the customers have to go to the retailer to request, and then it kind of comes to the wholesale part. When it comes to emergency works, you can contact the water company. So if it's for things like you want a new meter put in or something like that, you've got to go to your retailer to get that done, because it's within the codes of the guidance. But if it's an emergency situation, you can still call your local water company, and they will help you out. I mean, you know, all water companies operate. We operate differently, but we operate similarly. And one of the things that we're there is, we are there to support you. And if you have a problem, then you can get in contact. If it's an emergency, do get in contact with your water company. They probably have the so-called boots on the ground, I guess is probably the easiest way to describe it. You know, we've got workers in the field who are out there. Sometimes we have like sort of additional valves in the street or in the road, which are assets of the local water company. And what we can do is, or what the water company can do is, they can send an operative out to switch the water off in the road, which means that your site no longer has water. So if you're having a really bad burst, you can't find yours, perhaps the water company doesn't have records of where your stop tap is. There might be one in the road where they say, well, look, we can just turn the water off, and they would send somebody down to do that until you can get an emergency repair from someone like Paul's team to go and clamp that up, and then they'll turn it back on for you and stop that sort of additional.
It's always worth as well. It's always worth companies having that procedure in place. The form you talked about, where the meters at X spot on X corner, but within that, what you want to be doing is you want to be identifying your water contractor, make sure they're approved through the water company, but you want to be identifying that water contractor, talking to them about what they offer. Do they offer an emergency service for bursts? What do they offer, and how quickly can they attend? All that stuff's got to be in your plan, because there's contractors out there who won't be doing emergency bursts 24 hours a day, and there's some that will. So you've always got to get your ducks in order type of thing, prior to this, because the amount of companies I look after, and they don't have anything in place, and then there's the fumbling around, really stressed trying to get these things sorted out. They don't know who to turn, know where to go, what to do, and the phone us. But really, that company should have had a plan in place to sort of combat all that issue, And that's the advice: is get it sorted now.
Yeah. Well, I think you're exactly right. And we've got that plan on there, so do use it. It's there for you, and it does have things like sort of like make sure you know who your contractors are, but also make sure you know what the contact number is and who the primary contact is, so you know that if you ring that number and you get somebody else, you know who you need to speak to get things moving quickly. And again, have on there, it has things like have your local water company number there, so you can get through to the call. The call center, because what they'll be able to do is they'll then direct you through to probably the wholesale team, who will then be able to mobilize people to come and help you out if you are in a bit of an emergency situation. So top tip, have a plan, have all the numbers written down, make sure everybody knows where it is, how to access it, and all the information's on there to contact the people that you need to at the time.
It should be known as well, Andy, just on that point, that water companies aren't there to come and remedy commercial customers' issues. They'll only do it if there's a threat to their network, and it's such a large leak that they can't ignore it. So unless that's the case, what they will do is just come and turn it off for you. They won't come in and do it for you. It's got to be something that is draining a reservoir or something like that, where it's going to affect their network and other customers. They won't come on and just do the work for you. So please don't think that it's got to be a private contractor who comes out,
Absolutely, yeah. No, I think that's a good differentiator, mate. The water company will help you out to the extent that it can, but it's not going to do works on private land. That is effectively the customer's responsibility to be dealing with in the first place. And I suppose that's probably we're talking a lot about planning around this, because that's what it really needs. And I know both me and Paul have been having discussions lately around sort of planned preventative maintenance regimes of sites, and we're currently looking to put a package together to support customers with that. So once we've got that finalized, what we'll do is we'll maybe get another webinar up, and obviously people can come and find out what we can do for them, because again, if you've just got that planned maintenance regime in there and you know where all your assets are, that'll build the plan out to the fact that if you do have any sort of problems, one, you know who you're going to be able to contact to get that sorted, but two, you're going to be able to deal with it ASAP. So you're going to lose less water, you're going to have less damage, etc., etc. So we'll bring that to you in the next few weeks. And then I suppose, Paul, it's just kind of whether or not you could just give people a list of like sort of hints and tips about sort of how to protect their assets, just for this coming winter, which ironically enough, I look out the window and it's glorious sunshine, as always tends to be the case. But it was particularly cold the other day, I thought. But yeah, if you could maybe run through some hints and tips for people watching.
Yeah. I mean, you might have spoke too soon there, and you might have the worst winter that we've ever had.
But probably now that I've said it, yeah, exactly.
The customers can call you, not me, when they have someone to blame.
I'll do the apologising, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can have trace heating on internal pipework, so that's a good thing to have. It's trace heating. It's sort of you can have it on external pipework as well. Sorry, but for internal stuff, it's really effective for when like copper pipes are at risk and whatnot. So you can have trace heating on there. They send like a small pulse of electric current through your pipe. Doesn't affect anything else. It just basically puts that tiny bit of heat into your pipe, so it prevents it freezing. So you know, companies could look into that if they have a vulnerable sort of building or a room that's vulnerable, that keeps bursting under the sink or whatever. You know, that's something to look at. Chemical storage tanks, so an associated pipe work like that, you need them protecting as well. So if you've got anything like that on site that you store, make sure they're protected as well, because you know, it's not just water pipes that freeze. It can be all sorts of pipe work that you have on a site. So yeah, should look into that really. Like we've said, contacts in place for emergency procedures, because like we say, the water company will come out and help you, give you advice, and maybe shut your supply off if you don't know where to shut it off yourself. But that is normally as far as they'll go, unless they can't shut it off and it's an absolute major drain on the system, then they have to do something about it. Yeah. But you will still get charged, because you know they don't work for free. They can't work for free. They've got to cover the costs at least. So yeah, that's something to think about as well. Know where your water meter is. Is there any sub meters off it that you can identify, so that if you do have a burst, where you have a sub meter, there's normally a valve, a control valve. So if you do have a burst, know where your sub meters are on a site, so that you can quickly identify which leg that burst is on, and then you can just shut that burst off without affecting the rest of your site. So it's not always scramble to the water meter, the main incoming water meter, the revenue meter, and turn everything off, because then you've got a plant or a site that's got no water at all. Yeah. Try and separate your areas of the site with sub-metering. That's a really good idea. If you've not done that, it's something to think about, because like I say, if you've got a water critical site, it can separate that issue out from everything else, and then you can just work on that at your leisure. It's not an emergency anymore unless it's feeding something that's critical. So that's something to think about as well, getting sub-metering put in with control taps or control valves as well. Internal stopcocks.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Paul, as well, for the sub-meters, when we're talking about AMR, you can put AMR on those sub-meters as well, so you can get a sort of a more detailed view of where water's going in your site, and then if you've got that issue, it'll ping it up for you there and then, so you don't even have to have that panic at the beginning of like, well, do I need to switch the whole thing off? No, I know it's that section, and you know that's the bit I need to switch off and fix. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's fine. It's a good point, because obviously AMR systems that we set up for customers are not just the main meter. So you can have it just on your main meter. That's entirely up to the customer. But if you've got sub-metering around your site, we always advise that you get everything metered with AMR, because the AMR works as its own team, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So what it'll do is it'll say to you, right, you've got water rushing through your main meter, you've got a burst, and let's have a look at the rest of them. Bang, it's on that leg there. Go and turn it off. You know, so it can identify exactly where your water's going to that burst via the sub-meters. There's no sort of like scrambling around, manually looking at things, doing flow tests. There's none of that. It's just immediate, and it'll tell you exactly where everything is. So sub-metering on larger sites is absolutely the way to go in my eyes, you know, because it just takes all the hassle for you, identifies everything immediately, and you can get it knocked off pretty quickly, you know.
Yeah, cool, brilliant. Thank you very much. Any other tips?
Taps and overflows, stuff like that, you know. Our overflows going, dripping taps, you know, overflows obviously create an ice risk outside your building, so there's a health and safety issues, you know, so all things like that need to be looked at. You don't just leave an overflow running, because, you know, in the winter, things like that are actually dangerous. Yeah. Internal stopcocks, know where your internal stopcock is. If you've got a burst inside one building, you've got a few buildings on site, you only want to turn that building off. You don't want to be turning the full site off. So know where your internal stopcock is, just for those emergencies, so you can shut it down pretty quickly and avoid sort of computer damage and everything else that comes with office sleeps, you know. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, pretty much covered it really, Andy, unless you can think of anything.
I'm just thinking of, you know, sort of like we do have, obviously you've mentioned in briefly earlier on that we do have some customers who have like large networks, almost, you know, sort of village size networks of their own. Is it a matter that having valves in place is the right way to go, so that if they do have that problem, they just they can turn them off?
Yeah, it's all about network. It's all about managing your network properly. A lot of sites don't, you know, I have to convince a lot of my larger customers of the benefits of it, because these sites will be absolutely huge. I mean, I've got one site that's 5 miles long and something like 2 miles deep. So you can imagine the amount of processed water, raw water, potable water. There's pipes everywhere, huge pipes. So you can imagine if you've got a burst on there, if you can't section that burst off, the amount of water you're going to have to knock off to get to that burst. And then it's not just about turning the water off, because, you know, everybody on site needs water, processors need water. It's not just about turning that water off and fixing a leak. It's about letting everybody know, putting mitigation in place, getting bottled water, getting Bowsers, because these people can't work without water, you know. So then you've got to think about shutting it down. How long will it take? How long will it take before we can cut into the main? That can take hours. And then you've got to think about charging the water network back up. So a network like what I'm talking about can take hours and hours and hours to charge back up the water, so that everywhere is fed with water again. So you really don't want to have that.
What do you mean by charge up? Sorry, what do you mean by that?
Charge up. So once you turn the water off, obviously you're going to try and get rid of that water, so you can actually cut into the main to repair it. So that takes a long time in some cases. So then it's safe to cut into. The water's not under pressure. So then what you've got to do is you've got to effect the repair, make sure it's done correctly, obviously what we always do, and then you've got to charge the water back up. So that's basically turning the water on again to get water to every part of that site, and that takes a long time. You can't just turn the water onto a site, or anywhere really, any site. It doesn't have to be a huge site like what I'm talking about. You've got to charge it up in a fashion that doesn't create bounce back and things like that. So you charge a main up and the water comes through too quickly, it's basically going to create a sort of a sonic boom inside the pipe. Okay. There's better ways of explaining it, but if you think about that, the amount of pressure that goes in, and if it's in too quickly, it's just gonna blow your network apart. So then you've got real problems. So what I'm trying to say is, if you've got an issue like that and you've got to turn the water off, and there's only one place you can do it, that's the issues you've got. Whereas if you plan to start cutting valves in on different legs and separating the system out with valves, it's as simple as going onto the site, right? We think the leak's here. We do leak detection services. We think the leak's here. Can we shut this leg off? And that's it. You know, plain and simple, easy to do. It doesn't take all that effort. You don't have to send people home. You don't have to pay for Bowsers. You don't have to do all that. It's basically managing your network so that it's efficient for you to work on it. That's the best way of putting it, really. Yeah.
Brilliant.
But it's difficult to convince people because it's an expense that they don't see at the time. But when the water goes off, then they know they need it, because at the site I'm talking about, there's £1 million profit a day they lose. So, you know, it should be easy to convince them.
Yeah, it's not. Well, we'll keep trying. That's the main thing. And if people are interested or have any further questions about that, obviously you can get in touch with the team, and I'll put a slide up on the back end of this to just to direct you to Paul's team direct. I think one of the things is a lot of what we do commercial works, don't we? That's what we do as part of Northumbrian Water. That's what Total Water Solutions does in pipeline. So there's a lot of this that's kind of applicable to people's homes. Not all of it, but certainly some of it. But Northumbrian Water has some really good weather, like sort of winter weather advice on the website for your homes. So basically, if you go to nwl.co.uk /services/water /winter-weather-advice. Don't worry, that's why I'm going to put the link up. If you click on that, it'll give you a whole list of things that you can do around protecting your property for winter. And it's just a good resource to have, so do go and have a look at it and use that to protect your home. And also on there as well, we also work with HomeServe, which is one of the leading providers of home emergency assistance. I'm not qualified to tell you anything about it, so that's as far as I'll go, but there's a link on the website where you can find out more information if you're looking for sort of home insurance products to protect your internal water supplies, etc. That brings us to a close. The only thing I'll say is that we do have a short questionnaire after this. If you wouldn't mind filling that in, that would be very helpful to us. And I'll thank you in advance for doing so. And remember that next week, same time, 10 o'clock, Thursday, I want to say 19th, I hope that's the right date. We're doing a presentation on AMR and 5 ways that it can help your business meet its targets. So other than that, a big thank you from me.
A big thank you from me.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thanks, guys. Bye.